There have been calls from BYU faithful for years now that they want to see BYU tight ends truly become a core part of BYU's offensive identity once again. Well, if this young man can ultimately realize his potential and succeed in his lone year as a BYU Cougar, he could truly make BYU tight ends great again.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. Thank you for making it a part of your day. I'm Jake Hatch, executive producer of the KSL Sports Zone and 13-year credentialed media member at BYU. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. All right. A little bit different of situation with this podcast. Now, I'm going to take you back 6 months ago. About 6 months ago, I went on a BYU cruise, and there was a bit of a hectic situation. Remember, BYU was in contention to maybe make the Big 12 title game, and I was going on a cruise the very week of the Big 12 championship game. Now, ultimately did not pan out that way, and I found myself short on content despite not necessarily having my equipment with me as I was trying to get ready to leave on vacation. And a dear friend of the podcast, if I recall correctly, it was our good friend Y for Life. And Y for Life, I really don't know your first name. That's what I'm going to refer to you as your Twitter handle. Said, hey, something you should consider is recording some editions of the podcast that if you find yourself in a situation, you can have it ready to go and it can drop. Well, this is one of those situations. Now, whether it's an equipment failure or something, this is me recording this ahead of time. And the interview you're about to hear was recorded even longer ago. But nonetheless, BYU tight ends have been something that many of you out there, and trust me, I have seen it in my mentions, I've seen it in the YouTube comments throughout the past few football seasons, essentially since Matt Bushman exited the program, is that you want to see BYU tight ends become what they have been for literally decades. The era of Gordon Hudson, the Chris Smiths, the Spencer Needs, you can go on down the list, the Atula Mealy's, Chad Lewis's. Tight ends have been a core part of BYU's offensive identity and philosophy for literally decades. Well, in recent years, it's fallen by the wayside as wide receivers are really kind of taken over. They've kind of been the guys that have been the featured part of the passing game for BYU. And your reasons for why you believe that is the case might vary. Some of you might believe that in the case that the philosophy does not favor them under Aaron Roderick as the offensive coordinator. Some of you, and I'll include myself in this camp, just don't think that BYU's tight ends have had the type of athletes they've had in the past that are difference makers. I look at the pro day results for BYU's tight ends that were the Big 12 pro day this past spring. And when guys are running north of 5 flat in their 40s, how do you expect them to get separation, especially against power 4 opposition? Now, some of you also may believe it, just simply put, it's just not been the quarterback's featured weapon. Some quarterbacks prefer to throw it to the hashes and throw it to wide receivers. That very well could be the case as well. Any and all of those are valid conversations. But during spring camp this past year, Carsen Ryan was truly a focal point of BYU's offense. Now, quarterback situation being what it is, because I've re-recorded this since we found out about the Jake Retzloff situation, that's one thing that obviously will have to play out in time. But the one thing is that a young quarterback, if it is indeed the case that BYU has to go with somebody other than Jake Retzloff, their best friend can be a reliable tight end that finds himself open, and more importantly than that, is a reliable target that catches everything thrown their way. What I saw during spring camp is that BYU is very, very intent on making Carsen Ryan a core part of the offensive philosophy. And quite simply put, he's the best athlete BYU's seen at the position in quite some time. And it's nothing against the recent run of tight ends. It just wasn't good enough, simply put. Carsen Ryan was targeted early and often during the portions I got to watch this spring, the portions that people that are inside the program that feed me information got to watch. He was a guy that BYU sees as a big-time weapon. He's got 1 year to get it right. Many of you know he was a high school prep star here in the state of Utah, a 4-star prospect, ultimately committed to UCLA despite BYU chasing him at that time. Then he hit the transfer portal after 3 years in Westwood and ended up at the University of Utah last year. And with their offense stuck in neutral last year, he really never gained any traction with the Utes and decided, you know what? Not the situation I want to see myself in. So he ultimately hit the portal once again and landed at BYU. If he can really accomplish what I believe and others that are inside the football program who have far more impact on this believe, they believe that he could make BYU tight ends, as I mentioned, great again. He could really rehabilitate the image of the BYU tight end. I hope he does it. And I had a great chance at the tail end of spring camp to catch up with him to talk about his journey from UCLA to Utah and then finally to BYU and ultimately what he hopes to accomplish as a BYU Cougar. So without further ado, here you go, Carsen Ryan.
Your transfer from Utah to BYU, can you just kind of walk me through the whole process there?
Well, I mean, at a certain point in the season, I kind of decided that maybe I should think about entering the portal, and eventually I did at the end of the season and got in contact with BYU, and Coach Gilbride hit me up, and Coach Roderick, and we got talking. And early on, I had liked a lot of what they had been talking to me about and things that they'd offered me, with the offense and plans they said they had for me, and ways they envisioned using me, and so it really intrigued me about the school. And then when I took my visit, the way that things just kind of meshed personally, like getting along with Coach Gilbride, Coach Roderick, Coach Kalani, like lots of great people, and lots of good football knowledge too there. And so that's kind of what really influenced me to come here. And then all the extra stuff too, like the connections you can make as a BYU alumni and opportunities we get off the field as well. So it just, I feel like it put me in a spot to be successful on and off the field, the best that I wanted to be, and it brought me close home to family too as well. And so it was a kind of a no-brainer for me.
Now, you talked about how they envisioned using you and what they planned for you. Through a month's worth of practices, how has it measured up?
I feel like it's been a great spring ball so far, for myself and for the team. And we got a lot of good things done offensively. We were able to throw the ball a lot and get the ball to a lot of different playmakers in the field, which is, I think, the goal with this team is to utilize everyone that we have, and because we have so much talent on the offense that we can beat teams many different ways. And I think that we've been able to showcase that this spring. We were able to run the ball very well, especially early on, and then we were able to start throwing the ball a lot too and get the ball to all of our wide receivers. And I was able to get the ball a lot and get into a lot of different pass concepts that I really liked, and liked practicing and learning, getting with Jake, and getting the timing down for those. And so I think the offense has a lot of potential this year to be really explosive and even better than what we were last year. And they were a great offense last year, and so I just want to be able to help get us to that next step and be even greater to get us to Big 12 championship and playoff appearance.
Now, production from the tight end position was a point of consternation for BYU fans last year because they're used to a strong tradition of tight ends being a big part of this offense. Do you envision that you and the rest of the guys in that room right now can make the tight end a weapon again? Yeah,
I mean, that's the goal. We want to, be the best players on the field as a tight end group, and we want to be able to be a reliable position. Someone that always knows what their job is, someone who can do that job, and when you're called upon, be able to be. We don't have to worry about that guy. He's going to do his thing. Like, we want to be that. We want that to be our role and someone they can rely on. So, we have a lot of big goals for the tight end room this year, and I think we'll be able to fill a lot of those.
You talk about run blocking. Obviously, that's a big part of playing tight end here. They require inline guys to be willing to do that. I remember watching you in high school. I've watched you at UCLA and also Utah. You've been unafraid of putting your nose in there. Is that just a mentality? What causes you to be so willing to be a blocker?
Yeah, I mean, blocking is a big technique thing, and it starts off too, though, like you said, first mentality. Like, you got to be able to want to be in there, and you want to hit someone. Like, as tight end, you're going against guys that are going to be bigger than you, and so you can't just be like, oh, I'm bigger, so I can just go and beat them up. Like, you got to want to go and fight that person. Like, you got to want to go and beat them up, and so it's always been a mentality thing for me. I love run blocking, and it's always been fun to me, like physically dominating a person and putting them on their back, putting them in the ground, and making yourself the bigger man in that situation. So I've always enjoyed blocking, and as I've gotten older and more into college, and now I focus more on my technique, especially in how much I've had to rely upon that too. Is when you get to the higher levels of college sports and then eventually the pros, like, you gotta, like I said earlier, you're smaller, so you gotta really hone in that technique, and that's gonna make up for your lack of size and strength compared to other defensive linemen. So, but yeah, like you said, it's a mentality thing, and you gotta come in wanting to hit someone.
What's it been like working with Coach Gilbride?
Oh, it's been really good. I like his coaching style. I feel like he holds us to a high standard, and he expects us to perform at a high level, and he's always out there. He's coaching us every step of the way, like every drill. Like, nothing's too small. He always points it out. Like, got to get your hips through a little more here. Get your step a little flatter. Don't round as much. Like, small. He's always like looking at small details, and I feel like that's really helped me hone my technique just these few weeks I've been working with him, and I've enjoyed it a lot. And I feel like the more I can get to work with him this off season, I feel like I'll be able to take my technique to that next step to help me become an even better blocker. And that's a goal of mine, just to help clean up some of my technique issues. And I feel like I've been able to take a big step towards that this spring. And he's a great coach to do that because he's had so much experience in the NFL level and even college level, and so he's been around. He knows how to get things done. So,
talking about wanting to be a better blocker, what are your other goals for the off season?
Just getting my speed a little faster, and I feel like I was able to show that a little bit this spring. I had some athleticism and pass catching, and my goal, I feel like I've been a pretty decent blocker in college, and my goal is to take that level of blocking and be able to match my pass catching ability with that, because my goal is to get to the next level in the NFL, and I feel like if I can get that skill set just as high as my blocking and get my blocking even higher, I can have a good chance at the next level. So
There you have it. A big thank you to Carsen for taking the time to talk with myself, and thanks again for bearing with the technical difficulties. But hey, we weren't left up a creek without a paddle, to use that expression. And we'll be back, fingers crossed, with a full edition tomorrow, talking about everything I plan to talk about today. But nonetheless, as always, truthfully, you out there in Cougar Nation are what makes this thing go. So please continue to subscribe, rate, review, share this with your family and friends. Let them know it's on-demand BYU content in sports media form. They can get anywhere they get their podcasts: YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and feels like 1,000 more podcast apps are available. But thank you, as always, for all y'all's support. And once again, thank you for bearing with the technical difficulties. But as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars a part of your day. And once again, thank you to all of you who are everydayers right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.